And we begin tonight with the unescapable head-on collision of politics and sports.
I pay my money to watch them play football. I don't come out to watch a political rally.
We wish there was a place we could go to get away from politics. And for a lot of people, that's Sunday afternoons during the fall.
Over the past few years, the National Football League has become a political and cultural battleground, attacked by fans, commentators, and political leaders at the highest levels for allowing itself to be politicized by rebel athletes and media members.
The left demonstrates, the media spins, the NFL retreats, and great American football takes a hit.
Americans don't want politics shoved down their throat in football. They want beer and wings shoved down their throat.
Not everything needs to be politicized. What you do that moment is sacred and fun, and it's supposed to bring the family together.
Just shut up and play ball.
Yeah.
The left has hijacked this game.
What's gotten a lot less attention is all the ways that NFL football has been politicized on behalf of the power establishment all along. How for decades it's been pumping out messages that are impossible to separate from politics, whether people want to see them as political or not.
5 seconds now.
Sport has explicitly built its brand on a whole complex of images and messages that have helped shape everything from dominant ideas about patriotism, militarism, and war, to gender norms and our conception of American manhood, to the politics of race and the history of racism and segregation in America, to the meaning and place of money and corporate power in U.S. society. And I'd argue that this side of the political equation matters every bit as much as the images of political resistance and anti-racism that's coming from rebel athletes, and that usually dominates the discussions of politics and sports. And that whether we're football fans or not, or even sports fans, we all have a stake in understanding just how powerful the NFL has become as a cultural and political force in this country. I'm Dave Zirin, sports editor at The Nation magazine, and I've been a sports fan since I was a kid.
Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it!
I grew up in New York City, just an absolute sports freak. I followed all those great New York teams in the 80s, and my room was a shrine to folks like Darryl Strawberry, Keith Hernandez, and of course, Lawrence Taylor, the great number 56. During that time, I never really thought much about politics, and I definitely didn't think about the impact of sports on the wider culture. But that really changed for me when I was a college student in Minnesota in 1996 and saw this amazing story.
Now to the politics of sports, where basketball fans in Chicago have some very strong feelings about protest, patriotism, and prayer.
Abdul Rauf has been suspended by the NBA.
20 years before Colin Kaepernick took that fateful knee, there was a basketball player for the Denver Nuggets named Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, who made the decision to not go out for the national anthem before games because he said he felt like it violated his religious and political principles. And I remember seeing one of the talking heads say, Rauf must see himself as one of those athlete activists. And I'll never forget watching that and thinking to myself, athlete activist? What the hell is that? So I went to the library. I started checking out a lot of old articles. I started digging in the crates, reading old biographies, and I found a book called Second Wind by Celtic great Bill Russell. A book about his own fight to be more than an athlete. And then I dug deep into the history of Muhammad Ali.
Left to the face, or left to the right, Williams down. He may not get up.
And realized that far from just being the greatest boxer of all time and a remarkable showman, he was also an intensely political thinker who showed unbelievable guts in taking on the power establishment of his time.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Muhammad Ali has just refused to be inducted into the United States Armed Forces.
I've said it once and I will say it again. The real enemies of my people are right here, not in Vietnam.
All of this opened up this hidden history that the corporate sports media was not interested in telling. And I started to think to myself, does the sports world still have an impact on how we think about the way power operates?
When we think about the little kids being tossed from one side of the street to the other by the tremendous force of this hose, and we think about This picture just sickens me. This big, brave policeman down here with his knee on the throat of this lady. And I think the conscience of America is beginning to awaken.
Billie Jean King, world tennis champion and leader of a special brand of female revolutionaries.
I love tennis very much. I wanted it to change ever since I started in the sport. I thought it was just for the rich and just for the white, that I wanted to change the sport.
And when I started to think about the impact of sports on the wider culture, I quickly began to realize that much more than just being a site of resistance to the political order, sports can also work to reinforce the dominant status quo in really powerful ways of which we're often not even aware. I mean, I like the escapism of sports as much as the next person, but it's kind of hard to be at a Mets game at Citi Field, a ballpark named after a bank that was paid for with more than $500 million in taxpayer money, and not think to yourself, yeah, I think maybe there's some politics at work here that we should talk about.
And welcome members of the U.S. Army Sapper Leader Course.
Also, it's a little hard to go to a game and see all the patriotic and military displays that have been such a huge part of American sports since 9/11, and not wonder if these games are being used to promote a certain political and ideological vision. The fact is, it's not sports and politics which aren't allowed to mix, as we're so often told. It's only sports and a certain kind of politics. One set of political ideas is fortified by the sports world, and another is marginalized. And of course, there's no sport in America where these two currents have more of an impact on our country than NFL football.
And as they say in Tinseltown, roll 'em.
So they call it pro football. And thousands come to watch, to cheer. And millions more sit at home before TV sets, pursuing the elusive magic of the Golden Gate.
Over the past few decades, the National Football League has emerged as the closest thing we have to a national language.
What's been your view of this American professional football scene?
It's an amazing event and sight. It makes rock concerts look like tea parties.
Or even a national religion.
Sunday's cathedrals. During the 1970s, more than 100 million weekend worshipers turned out to hear their favorite gridiron gospel.
Dear Father, art Rooney in heaven, Hinesfield be thy name.
And over the years, the NFL has only gotten bigger.
It's almost a religious experience.
Now, a lot of this is because football is pretty much the perfect sport for television. A beautifully produced, highly commodified distillation of art, science, speed, and violence. That for a typical fan is sports at its most riveting and most elemental.
Now you can stream NFL.
And as we've moved headlong into the digital age, the television audience for pro football has actually grown, even as our cultural environment has splintered, and there are thousands of other offerings vying for our attention.
Hello, friends. Jim Nance, Tony Romo, Tracy Wolfson.
In fact, the NFL now has a bigger television audience than it did a generation ago. An amazing accomplishment that runs counter to pretty much everything else we see in the entertainment buffet that is our society. Every year, the Super Bowl is the most watched show on TV with over 100 million viewers. Other primetime and daytime rating slots.
The top 15 most watched shows in September, all of them were NFL games.
We are truly talking about a multi-billion-dollar corporate leviathan. And as with all iconic corporate brands, this has made the NFL not only a titanic financial force that stands at the top of the sports food chain, but also an incredibly powerful cultural force. Like Disney or Coca-Cola, the NFL has built an incredibly powerful brand identity by selling a very distinct set of cultural ideas and values that people identify with and find meaning in. And with the NFL, what they're selling more than anything else is a vision of America and Americana.
Man, oh man, you're my best friend. I'm screaming too. There's nothing there. There ain't nothing that I need.
NFL teams not only have a huge impact on the local economy, but also a tremendous effect on people's civic pride.
There's no place like home.
And so on an emotional level, NFL teams have become brands for their entire communities and cities.
We're a Lions diehard fans. That's my team.
Then at the same time, the NFL brand, maybe more than any other brand in the country, has become synonymous with a sense of national pride. This is the sport of the USA. Basketball is a global sport. Hockey is a Canadian and East European sport. Baseball is very much a geriatric sport in terms of US fandom, and more a Latin American sport with every passing year. But football is American to the core, at least in terms of promoting a certain vision of America. The NFL itself has been very open about this. In its own guidelines for communicating the NFL brand, they talk explicitly about the deeply American meaning of their iconic logo, the shield. They call the shield one of their greatest assets, as well as an enduring symbol because of the values it represents. And they proclaim that there are few sports identities that have been so deeply woven into the fabric of American culture.
Football is America.
Football is America. It makes America great.
Football inspires us to believe.
Football is America.
So given that the NFL itself admits that it's more than just a game and has a powerful influence on the culture, I'd argue that it's every American's job to take a close look at the values and ideas the NFL promotes, and to ask whether the shield and everything it's come to represent have done more to reveal what's best or to obscure what's worst about this country.
This is the face of the tiger.
Over the years, there's been no bigger stage for modeling traditional ideas about American manhood than football.
And this, the action of the tiger.
The NFL has long projected itself from its beginnings as the ultimate proving ground, an arena of conquest that equates being a real man with being physically tough, at ease with violence, and impervious to pain.
Their abilities are not measured by touchdowns, but the facility of absorbing punishment and dishing it out. The shattering impact of a block, the mountainous size of an onrushing defender, the splintering force of a forearm shiver. 1 ton of muscle with a one-track mind. It comes down to destroying the man in front of you. This is where it's really at in pro football.
In the grand narratives of NFL football, the sheer brutality of the game has the power to make men or to break them.
While some learned instinct and reaction, still others learned to be men. And every time they knocked you down, you got back up again.
What do you think a player learns from playing pro football, from his experience in the game?
He learns the same thing that a man learned in World War II. He learns how to take it. The men of the National Football League are real men. They know what it is to play hurt. They know what it is to play bleeding.
And the notion of using football as a tool for hardening men has its roots in the origins of the game. It's hard for us to envision this now because football today draws most of its players from poor and working class socioeconomic backgrounds and is 70% black. But American football started in the 19th century as a sport for privileged elites on Ivy League campuses, as a way to harden a new generation of young white men who are coming to be seen as too soft and bookish to lead Americans onto the world stage and extend the country's imperial ambitions.
Masculine women, feminine men, which is a rooster, which is a hen. It's hard to tell them apart today and say...
The end of the Civil War, the rise of the modern industrial society, and the growing push for women's equality had unleashed widespread fears that traditional manhood, male authority, and masculine toughness were all under siege by the forces of feminization. And this produced a full-blown crisis in masculinity and a kind of backlash fascination with making white men and America itself hard again. And you see the new game of American football being embraced and promoted by prominent leaders, not only as a sport, but as a substitute for war and a tool for toughening up the new generation. I mean, you look at the writings and speeches of Walter Camp, who's known as the father of American football, and you see this preoccupation with the state of American manhood all over the place. He writes things like, "Fear and timidity have no place in the boy's mental makeup." And Camp argues that football, quote, was doing for college-bred men what the experience of war did for so many of their predecessors. In fact, during football's early years, the games were so violent that dozens of young men died on the field of play. Died. And when newspapers started to report the shocking casualty counts, Camp shot back at critics of the game's lethal violence by proclaiming it was, quote, better to make a boy an outdoor savage than an indoor weakling. And Walter Camp wasn't alone. President Theodore Roosevelt, one of the earliest and most prominent promoters of the sport, also saw football as a way to cure the growing plague of effeminacy that he believed was infecting young men. At one point blasting critics of the game for wanting to, quote unquote, emasculate football, and writing to a friend that he was okay with minimizing the danger of the game so long as it wasn't played, quote, on too ladylike a basis. So what we see from the start is this huge psychic and emotional investment in football as a tool for social engineering, a vehicle for hardening men, all set against the backdrop of a festering crisis in masculinity and deep fears about the country going soft. Well, fast forward to our own time, and it's amazing how little has changed.
Boisterous masculinity is systematically suppressed to make way for a timid caretaker class. Men feel that they can't be men.
I just think people are soft in this country.
How are we breeding the next generation of leaders when everyone is so soft and weak?
We are wimping down. We're wussifying American men.
Our culture today is trying to completely demasculate all of the young men.
The deconstruction of America begins with and depends on the deconstruction of American men.
Over the past few years, we've once again heard a rising chorus of voices decrying the so-called wussification of America.
Men who are heterosexual, strong, aggressive competitors are no longer an acceptable part of society. Not really. They're the problem.
You go to college campuses now and you'll find classes on how to take masculinity out of men.
And as in the 19th century, we've seen these fears play out on the stage of football.
What does the NFL stand for? Masculinity, strength, toughness. I don't want it to be taken over by a bunch of wusses.
What used to be considered a great tackle, a violent, head-on-head violent. Now they tackle. Oh, head-on-head collision. Bing, flag. Football's become soft like our country has become soft.
But while these defenders of the old masculine order have been wistfully pining away for the manly men of days gone by, they've forgotten to mention one crucial fact, that the impervious image of manhood that the NFL has been promoting for decades is a complete and total lie.
Get ready. Ready to be hit, crushed, squeezed, and mashed into curious shapes.
The National Football League has been great at glamorizing the hard hits.
As the players became bigger, stronger, and faster, the game became increasingly hazardous, and therefore even more exciting for player and spectator alike.
The seemingly superhuman toughness of the quote-unquote real men play the game.
You can't hurt this! I'm a machine, jerk!
But they've left out the physical costs.
When I would hand the ball off and I would watch a guy go into the pile, what you hear and what you see, you wonder how guys are coming out of that. It sounds like a car accident.
Not just the soreness on Monday, but also the careers cut short and the lifetime of crippling injuries.
The physical and mental toll of the nation's most watched sport is being highlighted by the surprise retirement of the NFL's Andrew Luck. In 7 years in the league, the former first-round draft choice has had a lacerated kidney, injured ribs, at least one concussion.
For the last 4 years or so, I've been in this cycle of injury, pain, rehab, and it's been unceasing. It's taken my joy of this game away.
The league doesn't want us to think too much about what the Players Union once said, that the NFL is the only profession with a 100% injury rate. Or what a former player once told me, that to play NFL football is to skip middle age. You go straight from being young to being old.
I have this atrophy. I'm starting to look like a skeleton, and it's just this right hand alone. But I have this throughout my body.
Or the fact that the average player's career lasts only 3.5 years.
And for the rest of our lives, we're going to be dealing with some of this stuff. The injuries don't go away.
Their pain doesn't either. I don't know how many surgeries I've had since past. 4 knee surgeries, fused neck, then another surgery, then another surgery.
It takes me forever to get dressed. It takes me forever to do simple things like put your shoes on. I've had issues with pain medication. I think that is a problem that a bunch of ex-players have. I'm not sure it's talked about as much as it should be.
The fact is, the NFL has systematically tried to keep all of these realities out of view.
Some of the nation's toughest athletes, pro football players now retired, are suing and claiming a secret world of deception by the league, where powerful painkillers were handed out like candy.
We now know the league spent decades pushing drugs on NFL players to mask their pain, causing irreparable damage to their bodies and brains. But that's not the mythology embodied by the Shield. The NFL has built its brand on being the ultimate blue-collar working man's game. But despite the nice stories they tell to burnish their brand's appeal with working people, their values are corporate through and through and all about the bottom line. As Tex Schramm, an original president and general manager of the Dallas Cowboys, said famously during the 1987 players' strike, "The players are cattle and owners are ranchers, and owners can always get more cattle."
It's almost like a cattle call where you'd have 20 to 25 guys standing with your pants half down, waiting in line for a doctor that's got 100, different syringes lined up, and you're walking through, they're sticking you one at a time as you walk in and out.
Our players were shot up like cattle. They were brought to market and then discarded like pieces of meat.
And most egregiously, they don't want us to think about the devastating brain injuries that NFL players have been suffering for decades. What is known as CTE.
CTE is increasingly recognized as a potential risk for athletes participating in contact sports, such as American football.
To Adams. Ooh, he got popped in the face. And mouth guard comes out, and they're asking for help right away.
CTE gradually interferes with normal brain functioning and may lead to changes in behavior such as impulsivity, explosivity, and violence, changes in mood such as depression and hopelessness, and cognitive changes such as memory loss and cognitive decline.
He was exceptional, a 4-time Pro Bowl safety, number 22, a 2-time Super Bowl champ.
This one's for Giles, intercepted by Dorson.
Teammates say Dave Durson was also exceptionally smart and kind, which is why they were shocked when last week the 50-year-old killed himself with a gunshot to the chest. He sent a text message to his ex-wife hours before.
He told me he loved me very much, and he was truly sorry, and that he loved the kids, and that he felt there was something wrong with his brain on the left side, and for me to please get it to the NFL.
There is no helmet that will protect a player from this any more than there's a special cigarette, no matter how big the filter, that won't give you cancer. And speaking of cigarettes, we now know that NFL executives, like the tobacco industry before them, were saying for years that the science was inconclusive while hiding their own secret studies that said otherwise.
NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell wouldn't acknowledge a link between violent hits and brain disease.
I just asked you a simple question. What's the answer?
The answer is the medical experts are no better than I would with respect to that, but we are not treating that in any way and delaying anything that we do.
The study's author also testified the findings don't prove a link between playing football and mental problems later in life.
Those numbers may or may not indicate an elevated risk from a career playing football. We can't draw a conclusion.
110 of 111 former NFL players who had died and donated their brains had CTE.
The bottom line is that the NFL has been more concerned with managing the damage to their brand than the damage to their players' brains and bodies.
I'm Roger Goodell.
Something that came across in highly ironic and insulting fashion when NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, who was well aware at the time that his sport has been conclusively linked to ALS, took the Ice Bucket Challenge to show the compassion and empathy at the heart of the NFL family. Meanwhile, in an indication of just how closely people have come to identify the NFL with American manhood itself, even the most minimal and inadequate reforms designed to improve safety have been interpreted as a sign that American men and America itself are under attack from the forces of feminization and that the NFL of old is being ruined.
As a fan myself, I watch football because I want to see really tough dudes go to war with each other on the gridiron. Yet now I'm told that, one collision is, you can't hit anybody anymore. How much of it also is the fact that NFL is getting pretty soft?
It's a more feminized, softer NFL. Why don't they just put away the pigskin, Greg, bring out the Nerf ball, play in a bouncy castle, or something, less violent?
Something tells me, Gavin, that you think football, you should let them hit each other.
Of course you should. It's the American way.
Yeah.
Oh, concussion, schmushin, they ought to call it. Yes, you get bonked in the noggin. Sure, that's life.
We don't go by these new and very much softer NFL rules. Concussion, up, up. Got a little ding on the head. No, you can't play for the rest of the season. Our people are tough.
Oh, big hit. Penalty marker on the play.
They're going to say he hit a defenseless receiver.
Guys like Donald Trump don't want us to think about the fact that these reforms were pushed by players themselves.
The NFL is attempting to make the game safer, implementing new concussion rules. Players say they have been fighting for this for a very long time. Some say it's too little, too late.
People like them have so much more to gain professionally and politically by standing up for so-called real men than the actual men who play the game, and by creating the illusion that these reforms are a symptom of a country gone soft because of feminists and social justice warriors.
The social justice warriors are coming in here trying to legislate the game based on their own personal political preferences because the NFL has direct roots to masculinity. It is all man. It is a man's game. And that's what all the focus on the meanness is and the injuries.
These ideological distortions and attempts to politicize and weaponize football to score points in the culture wars don't just show contempt for the actual men who play the game. They also show contempt for other victims of the NFL's culture of violent masculinity.
We have reported so often on bullying in America, but we never expected that some of the toughest men in the country would say it is happening to them.
The locker room is supposed to be a professional work environment, and it's a union workplace. But you still have people like Richie Incognito, who viciously bullied a fellow player, Jonathan Martin.
According to the report, Martin says he was driven into depression and believed his failure to stand up to his teammates was a personal shortcoming.
Richie Incognito's defense was that he was trying to make Jonathan Martin tough enough to play in the NFL.
The Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel reports Dolphins coaches asked Incognito to toughen up Martin.
And so this kind of behavior becomes valorized. It becomes the sort of thing where everything is justified no matter how disgusting, because it allows you to become the kind of person, the kind of real man who can play in the NFL.
Kind of the argument being made here about Jonathan Martin that, we got to rough you up, we got to toughen you up first, and that's just the way we roll.
Well, weak and soft have never survived in an NFL locker room, period.
And of course, the league's mostly gutless handling of bullying in the locker room is 100% connected to its mostly gutless response to homophobia.
It's the most homophobic place in the world. If you've never been in it, trust me.
Then at the same time, there are all the ways this seeming obsession with denigrating anything even remotely feminine in men has extended to a culture of rampant sexism and the denigration of women.
A New York Times report last month found that several cheerleaders alleged they were ordered to act as dates for sponsors and suite holders during a calendar photo shoot, and that they were told to pose topless in front of those guests, even though there was no nudity in the calendar.
It's devastating. These women have been texting me for the last
36 hours wondering if their nude bodies or photographs are circulating through the inboxes of the NFL. It's just indicative of the toxic culture that existed within the Washington football team and around the league.
And it's not just cheerleaders.
There's breaking news just coming in about Washington's NFL team. 15 former female employees are speaking to the Washington Post, detailing allegations of sexual harassment over a span of 13 years.
Emily Applegate, who worked in the marketing department, she said, quote, "It was the most miserable experience of my life."
These people are not going to believe or care about some young woman that's making $32,000 a year when they have somebody that's the CMO of a company that they have to protect.
And there's really no way to separate the attitude towards women that's on display here from the league's handling of domestic violence.
It is a culture that clearly puts up with domestic violence.
The NFL has been forced to act in recent years only when there is immense public pressure and it becomes impossible to deny and ignore, as in the case of Baltimore Ravens running back Ray Rice.
Disturbing new video tonight of an NFL football player knocking out his fiancée.
The fact is, if that video doesn't go public, Roger Goodell would have done what he has always done before: hide it behind the shield.
ESPN reporting the Ravens knew exactly what was on that brutal elevator tape for months, but they still pressed top NFL officials to go easy on their star player.
It's just funny, like, what the league will tolerate and what they won't tolerate.
Pro football fans were seeing pink yesterday.
It's for Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
Meanwhile, the NFL has spent more time, energy, and money targeting women with PR campaigns to keep them watching, rather than appealing to men to stop the abuse.
So here's a question. What does all of this mean for the future? What does it mean for female fans whose dollars are so coveted by the NFL, who make up an estimated 45% of the NFL's fan base? Will the NFL, in all its power, take the lead on the issue of domestic violence?
The point here isn't that the NFL is any worse than any other traditionally male cultural institution in America when it comes to things like domestic violence or sexual assault or bullying or homophobia. It's not that there's more domestic violence or incidents of sexual assault among NFL players than in the broader population. This is more about how this league, rather than using its cultural influence to lead, has failed time and again to take responsibility for their own role in perpetuating a culture of violent masculinity.
In football, the object is for the quarterback, otherwise known as the field general, to be on target with his aerial assault, riddling the defense by hitting his receivers with deadly accuracy, in spite of the blitz, even if he has to use the shotgun. With short bullet passes and long bombs, he marches his troops into enemy territory, balancing this aerial assault with a sustained ground attack which punches holes in the forward wall of the enemy's defensive line.
Hitting begins with hand-to-hand combat at the line of scrimmage. Their war is a lonely war that is submerged and fought in the trenches.
The idea of football as a battlefield and players as warriors is built into the very language of the sport.
Like guided missiles, players carried heavy payloads, and they used their bodies to launch retaliatory strikes with devastating effect.
Number 50, search and destroy.
Well, when he is not coaching the Cougs, you can find head football coach Mike Leach leading a lecture. For the last 5 weeks, Leach and former state senator Mike Baumgartner have been teaching a course called Insurgent Warfare and Football Strategy.
During the surge in Iraq, American military focused on constricting the insurgency's space, said Baumgartner. Then, Coach Leach used Cougar football film to show how his air raid offense gives opponents fewer options in space.
And all of this has made the NFL the nation's premier staging ground for displays of patriotism and militarism. From massive field-sized flags and flyovers to the NFL's Salute to Service campaigns and four-star generals doing the coin flip before the Super Bowl. And it tells you everything you need to know about how deeply political and ideological these things are when you realize they only really start to become a common feature of the NFL during the Vietnam War. During the 60s, you have all these different movements: the anti-war movement, the Black freedom struggle, challenging the old order. And it's precisely at this moment that the NFL starts to be weaponized.
Whenever they wave the stars and stripes above you.
Not from the left-wing radicals of the counterculture, but by those who saw in football a way to project the traditional patriotic values that were being questioned in the larger society.
Let's make America what it used to be.
Before anyone can embrace freedom, I think they must first embrace those things which underline freedom. They are duty and respect for authority and a development of a mental discipline.
No NFL figure embodied these traditional values more than Green Bay Packers coach Vince Lombardi, whose teams were dominant throughout the 1960s. Lombardi represented everything the left-wing counterculture allegedly seemed to lack: physical and mental toughness, discipline, respect for authority. And in 1969, the Nixon administration would mobilize Lombardi and NFL football as political weapons. 2 days after the Vietnam War moratorium, one of the largest anti-Vietnam protests to that point, a Nixon aide drafted a memo encouraging the president to attend football. Nixon agreed, becoming the first sitting president to attend an NFL game, which just so happened to be between the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington football team, which was now coached by Vince Lombardi.
I think as we think of men like Vince Lombardi, we can think of what that should mean and can mean to America.
It did set up a contrast. He wanted the country to know that football fans were different than the moratorium people. The Redskins made a decision as to what they wanted to do for their halftime that involved all the branches of the armed forces.
The message to the American people was clear. During a time of deep political divisions, the National Football League was on the side of Nixon, the flag, and the war. In fact, Pete Rozelle, the NFL's commissioner, had already made the decision to use the league to tip the scales in a pro-war direction. Super Bowl II featured the first military flyover. And in 1969, Rozelle staged an elaborate patriotic halftime show called America Thanks.
Eagle, the symbol of American pride and power.
And as American and Vietnamese casualties were piling up, and popular opposition to the Vietnam War was growing, Rozelle turned his attention to the national anthem. Before the 1970 Super Bowl between the Minnesota Vikings and the Kansas City Chiefs, Rozelle demanded that players stand upright and totally still during the anthem with helmets held under their arms. Rozelle went so far as to mandate that players prepare for the national anthem by doing drills during Super Bowl practices, appointing a member of his staff as, quote, vice president in charge of the national anthem. Meanwhile, the NFL did its best to act like it reflected the free-thinking spirit of the times.
During the 1960s, there was marching in the street and walking on the moon. Profound changes affected every aspect of American culture, and pro football was no different.
But the rebel image the NFL tried to cultivate during this period was family-friendly and limited to things like players growing their hair out.
From his unconventional white shoes to his mod god hair, Namath stands alone in his flamboyance.
Guys like Joe Namath were the epitome of rebels without a cause, completely devoid of any of the scary political content that was raging in the real world. Their rebellion only as long as their sideburns.
Some football players wanted some things changed. I mean, why would a guy not be able to wear a mustache or have long hair? Silly things, you know.
And on the very rare occasions when NFL players did show the courage to stand up for what they believed in, they paid a heavy price.
My next guest was one of pro football's most ferocious linebackers, and he's written a book which is not out yet, but a lot of people are dreading its publication. Will you welcome, please, Dave Magacy.
Just look what happened to St. Louis Cardinals linebacker Dave Magacy, who in many ways was the Colin Kaepernick of his time. Magacy refused to come out for the anthem and then walked away from the sport, writing a blistering book that exposed how the language and culture of the league were being used to sell the Vietnam War.
I think the whole raison d'etre of football is violence, it's institutional violence. A man by the name of Thomas Morgan wrote a piece in Esquire about 3 years ago called The American War Game.
And like Colin Kaepernick, paid for raising these issues with his job.
It really came down to in my last year in 1969 when I was benched because of my anti-war activities.
The message was clear. The only political messages allowed in NFL football are those that promote uncritical patriotism, blind obedience to political authority, and support for American militarism. Something we've seen again and again in the years since, especially during times of war.
4, 3, 2, 1, and 5. Oh, there's a hit.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait.
In 1991, 10 days before the Super Bowl between the New York Giants and the Buffalo Bills, the United States launched a massive aerial assault against Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces in Kuwait and initiated the first Gulf War. It was the first major U.S. combat operation since the catastrophe in Vietnam. And while there didn't seem to be much enthusiasm for football, the NFL made the decision to play the game.
In a stadium with the tightest security of any NFL game ever played, Super Bowl 25 began under the shadow of war in the Mideast.
And proceeded to use it to push the pro-war index to new heights. The NFL gave out 72,000 American flags to fans to wave as they entered the stadium. Then there was this.
Did you ever know that you're my hero?
The NFL turned to Disney to produce a patriotic halftime show cast almost entirely with children, intercutting all American childhood innocence with images of troops going to war in the Gulf, and then brought the children of American military personnel onto the field, before capping it all off with a child-friendly war message from President George H.W. Bush and First Lady Barbara Bush.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Good evening from the White House to everyone in the Sunshine State and around the world enjoying this wonderful game. Today we should recognize the men and women in our armed forces. Far away from home, they protect freedom in the Persian Gulf and around the world.
On behalf of the whole Bush family, thank you for allowing us to be with you tonight.
And God bless you all, and God bless all freedom-loving people around the world.
But the pregame festivities stole the show when Whitney Houston, dressed in red, white, and blue, delivered what's probably the most famous national anthem performance in sports history. As she sang, American military personnel held flags of U.S. allies in the war effort, and the American flag was everywhere. Look, the issue is not that Whitney Houston sang a song in incredibly moving fashion, because she did. It's that it was in service of a war, and that the NFL was again revealed as the perfect syringe for the drug of militarism.
Retaliatory strike in Dallas.
This mix of NFL football and the politics of militarism and nationalism have only become more seamless in the years since. So as the 1990s go on, you saw things like Monday Night Football using these insanely militarized graphics in their opening without anybody feeling the need to explain why. And then came 9/11. The planes hit the buildings on Tuesday. Thousands of people were dead. And the NFL was still planning to go ahead with games the following Sunday with this incredible sense of its own self-importance.
I don't even understand why we're here today. I think all games should be canceled this week.
It actually took a players' rebellion led by the New York Jets to say, no, we need to take a week off of games.
The people in this locker room have neighbors who are missing. You know, our children's friends in schools don't have dads and moms anymore.
And so there were no games the following Sunday. But when play resumed, that's when you started to see all of these hyper-militarized, hyper-patriotic displays that used to be reserved just for the Super Bowl, now taking place in every game.
Commissioner Paul Tagliabue made sure each game had a patriotic feel.
It was to show that as a nation we were unified and resilient and determined and not cowed.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Super Bowl 36.
And then there was the Super Bowl itself that year. The U.S. had gone into Afghanistan a couple months before, and the Bush administration was now ginning up its propaganda efforts to lead the U.S. to a war in Iraq under false pretenses.
The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
And the Super Bowl would do nothing to get in the way. It was broadcast on Fox, and throughout, Fox used military graphics to introduce players and statistics.
Here's the Ram offense, led by the man who Ron Pitts just talked to, Kurt Warner, two-time NFL.
Then, as with Whitney Houston during the Gulf War, the rock group U2 delivered a musical performance that summoned up patriotism on the eve of war.
America!
As they ran the names on a big screen of everyone who died in 9/11. From that point on, the militarism and nationalism that had been showing up in bursts in the past would become fully and seamlessly integrated into NFL football every single week.
This is a presentation of Fox Sports.
The NFL also developed a formal partnership with the Pentagon and the armed services to do events like Salute to Service.
On this Sunday, we take a moment to celebrate something bigger than the game we all love. America.
There's always been militarism in the NFL, especially coinciding with times of actual war. But it was only after 9/11 where you see a permanent state of militarism nest in the NFL, which makes the case of Pat Tillman all the more remarkable.
Number 40, Pat Tillman.
Back in 2001, Tillman was coming off the best year of his career. He was tough and loyal, a coach's dream. Then after 9/11, he shocked the world by joining the Army Rangers.
You know, my great-grandfather was at Pearl Harbor, and a lot of my family has gone and fought in wars, and I really haven't done a damn thing as far as laying myself on the line like that.
Then tragedy struck.
Pat Tillman, who gave up a multi-million-dollar contract in professional football, has been killed.
The Army awarded him a Silver Star for his gallantry in action against an armed enemy. They said that Tillman charged up a hill to protect his men, but was shot down by the Taliban. That was the official story, but there was only one problem. It was a lie.
Accounts and evidence surfaced showing he was actually killed by friendly fire.
Pat and these other soldiers volunteered to put their lives on the line for this country. Anything less than the truth is a betrayal of those values that all soldiers who have fought for this nation have sought to uphold. A terrible tragedy that might have further undermined support for the war in Iraq was transformed into an inspirational message that served instead to support the nation's foreign policy wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And maybe the worst part about all of this was that this whitewashing of Tillman's story also hid what might be the most important part of his story. That while he was in Iraq in 2003, he had turned against the war. He started to read the anti-war author Noam Chomsky and decided that the invasion of Iraq was illegal as hell. And the way the NFL responded to all of this tells you just about everything you need to know about its definition of patriotism and its loyalty to our nation's service members.
Good morning, America, and welcome to a special edition of Fox NFL Sunday.
Fox NFL Sunday commemorated Veterans Day just a few years later by broadcasting from the Pat Tillman USO Center at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan.
The memory of Pat Tillman lives on this very airfield here at Bagram.
And rather than bothering to mention that Tillman had turned against the war, the Fox commentators, dressed in full camouflage, used his life and death to promote war.
The tie between the U.S. military and the NFL has always been a strong one.
The ties between professional football and the U.S. military grew immensely during World War II, and today that bond is stronger than ever.
But the hijacking of Pat Tillman's memory hasn't stopped there. In the midst of the NFL player protests against police brutality and racial injustice, Tillman's wife blasted Donald Trump and others for exploiting her husband's service and sacrifice to score political points. Now, a lot of those who knew Tillman best and were moved by his courage in speaking out against the injustice of the war in Iraq were convinced he would have been among the first to silently kneel alongside Kaepernick.
You know, I'd be shocked if Pat Tillman wasn't out there taking a knee with these players, because Pat cared about people who were exploited, people who were oppressed. He didn't care so much about symbols.
But that didn't stop Trump from retweeting an account that used Tillman's image and service to cast the protests as disrespectful to the troops and call for a boycott of the NFL. Kaepernick himself had repeatedly gone out of his way to say he was protesting on behalf of the freedoms and ideals American service members have fought and died for, not against them.
You know, I have great respect for men and women that have fought for this country. I have family, I have friends that have gone and fought for this country. And they fight for freedom. They fight for the people. They fight for liberty and justice for everyone. And that's not happening.
Black man in America, so I don't know what that feels like, and I never will. I suggested kneeling because you can often see an image of a warfighter taking a knee in front of a fallen brother's grave to pay respects.
The NFL commissioner breaking his silence on the national anthem protest. Goodell told the Associated Press that he disagrees with Colin Kaepernick's choice. Goodell said that he does not support disrespecting the flag.
Instead, for 4 full years, the league helped reinforce the one-dimensional view that the player protests were by definition disrespectful to the flag and the troops.
We encourage all our players to respect the flag. For us, we're all about patriotism.
Watching the NFL machine wrap itself in the flag like this, it was easy to forget that the same league executives and owners who were lecturing black players about loyalty to the troops had been busted just a year before by Congress for using patriotic and military displays to line their own pockets.
An unprecedented congressional review has found those moments are often actually paid for by the Department of Defense.
We thought they were just honoring the servicemen. Yeah, you would think, except these billionaire NFL owners are, getting a couple $100,000 for having a flag fly over their stadium. It's really disgusting.
Senator Jeff Flake and his fellow Senator John McCain of Arizona call it paid patriotism.
For many Americans, football is deeply patriotic and woven into the very fabric of our country's unique history and heritage. That's why I and so many other Americans were shocked and disappointed to learn that several NFL teams weren't sponsoring these activities out of the goodness of their own hearts, but were doing so to make an extra buck. Many of the color guard performances and troop recognition ceremonies were actually funded with American tax dollars and pocketed by wealthy NFL teams.
Yet this didn't garner nearly as much outrage as Kaepernick taking a knee.
So I would tell this guy, you stay seated, punk, because the men and women who have fought for that flag are so much more important and so better than you.
Have respect for this flag. Have respect for the men and women who have died for us to have these freedoms.
You want to kneel, sit, or raise your fist during the national anthem? You ought to go kneel in front of a guy who's lost his limbs fighting for you.
The reality was this was a protest to raise awareness about police violence and racial inequity, but they didn't care.
And don't give me this crap that you guys want to support reform and stand up against social injustice. Shame on you. Shame on all of you.
Suggesting that the reaction to NFL players protesting during the anthem might have as much to do with the politics of race as anything else.
All right, Kaepernick, maybe you can go play for the Nigerian Nickelbacks or something. I'm sure that they'll treat you very well over there.
He's un-American and he doesn't deserve to be in our country.
All white,
so
all lives matter.
That's where we stand. If you want to live in our country, you respect the flag, you respect our military. It's sad. He's really a sad, pathetic person.
Football is a microcosm of America. All races, religions.
For years, the NFL has branded itself as a model of racial diversity and equality, a level playing field in the best American sense.
This is the only place that I've seen where segregation didn't play a part.
during the course of those 3 hours on Sunday afternoon. I mean, I played with guys from Mississippi. I know fathers were probably members of the Klan. But on Sunday afternoon for 3 hours, their commitment was to their teammates.
4 African American players.
So we get NFL-produced pieces about how talent should be all that matters, not the color of one's skin.
Vince Lombardi, to his credit, said, listen, we don't draft by color here. We draft by football ability. He said the only colors we got in Green Bay are green and gold.
These stories are important and shouldn't be minimized, but they also shouldn't be allowed to conceal the darker history behind the shield when it comes to race. To its credit, when pro football started to establish itself in the 1920s, pro teams fielded a smattering of black players, including the great Paul Robeson and star quarterback Fritz Pollard, who in 1920 led the Akron Pros to the first championship game in NFL history, and a year later was named the league's first black coach. Well, all of that changed in 1933 when NFL owners got together and made a gentleman's agreement to ban black players altogether. An ugly but mostly unknown story that's impossible to separate from George Preston Marshall, the owner of the NFL franchise in Boston and one of the most notorious and outspoken racists in the history of the league. In the years leading up to the 1933 ban, Marshall had openly refused to allow black players to play on his team, and he reportedly pressured the rest of the league to do the same, finally succeeding in 1933. It would take 13 years and a world war for the league to finally start integrating and signing black players again, beginning with Kenny Washington out of UCLA, who broke this color barrier in 1946, a year before his UCLA football teammate, a guy by the name of Jackie Robinson, would do the same in baseball.
Young black men from small Negro colleges in the South and the West came to the game in a steady stream.
And by 1952, every team but one had integrated. It was the team of George Preston Marshall, which he had renamed the Redskins.
Hail to the Redskins. Hail victory. Braves on the warpath. Fight for old DC. Run a pass and score, we won a lot.
In the early days, when the team first moved to Washington, they were the southernmost franchise. And having an all-white team was part of marketing themselves to the Jim Crow South.
You know, the fight song, even Hail to the Redskins, said for old Dixie. It didn't say for old DC. That was changed later. So they were playing to the South.
Of racial epithet. You shouldn't be using that to sell a national sports team to America or to the rest of the world.
But Snyder simply countered with unearned authority that the name was actually a mark of respect.
Most people understand what the team name means. They look at it, as we all do, as honor, respect.
And all along, the NFL echoed the line that trading in cartoon stereotypes was a sign of deep and abiding respect for the rich cultural heritage of indigenous peoples.
This is the name of a football team that's had that name for 80 years and has presented the name in a way that has honored Native Americans.
It's a tried and true formula that American corporations like the NFL have been perfecting for years. Appropriate the cultures of minority groups to keep your mostly white customer base happy and entertained. Justify it by saying you're honoring and celebrating diversity. And don't think too much about whether you're helping deflect attention away from persistent racial inequalities. We've seen a similar pattern play out in different ways with the NFL's enthusiastic, decades-long embrace of black culture.
From the top, it looks executive and slick, but it's more. The game has soul.
During the social and cultural changes of the late 1960s and 70s, as more and more black players arrived on the scene and made their mark on the league, the NFL's messaging began to shift.
Professional football, the sport with the flash, dash, and thrills custom-made for the new America, the now America.
Black culture was now ascendant in America, and the league's chief storyteller, the legendary NFL Films, started moving to its rhythms.
Thankfully, the 70s did bring a change of rhythm. Sunday with Soul had arrived.
The same league that had been weaponized by Nixon and the right to push blind patriotism and bang the drums of war for America's invasion of Vietnam was now marching to the beat of black culture and racial diversity and wrapping itself in an aura of black cool.
And these bands symbolized the emergence of an increased African-American influence in the National Football League.
It was an open-armed embrace of black culture that has only intensified in the years since. Today, in a league now dominated by black players, the amped-up patriotism and militarism are still as strong as ever. But so are images and messages aligning the league with black entertainment culture, racial diversity, and the fight for racial justice. This is a league that wants us to know that it gets it. It wants us to know that it's not only a shining example of racial diversity, but also on board with the fight against systemic racism.
It's in the Declaration of Independence, right? If you have the ability, it is your obligation to go and make change. And I think that's what our players feel, that's what our clubs feel, and I think that's what the NFL is doing.
Come on, everybody put your hands in the air. Put your hands way up in the air. Now let me welcome everybody to the Wild.
But these images and messages of racial diversity and equality, like so many other things with the NFL, have also concealed a much darker reality. Just look at how power is actually distributed in the league today. First of all, 70% of the players in the NFL are African American. But as we're having this conversation, there are no black owners in the National Football League. Zero. This is the reason why NFL player Michael Bennett said that the NFL is actually segregated, not integrated. It's segregated between those who own and those who play. And there's another piece to this.
Why is a league with 70% of its players African American, led by head coaches who've been predominantly white?
Even though more than 2/3 of NFL players are black, as of this discussion, more than 90% of head coaches in the NFL are white.
This morning, a bombshell lawsuit. Former Miami Dolphins coach Brian Flores is suing the NFL and 3 teams, claiming, quote, in certain critical ways, the NFL is racially segregated and is managed much like a plantation.
In 1919, Fritz Pollard was the first African-American head coach. 100 years later, we've got 3 head coaches, maybe soon to be 4 or 5, and 1 general manager. That is shameful, in my opinion. That is not much progress.
This is what power and authority look like in the NFL. African American men represent the overwhelming majority of the product and the labor, yet the people who own and lead that labor are overwhelmingly white.
You've got to just get to the honest place where you say, I may have a bias, I may have some psychological discomfort with black management.
It hurts me as a former player because, you know, we're good enough for you to use our body, but we're not good enough for you to use our mind.
Only one man commands the flight of a football. He is the quarterback.
And then, of course, There's the history of black quarterbacks in the NFL.
Like Hollywood's matinee idols, pro football's quarterbacks draw the camera's eye with a magnetic allure.
For years, being a quarterback was thought of as a thinking man's position and only suitable for white players. There's a long and ugly history in this country of seeing black athletes, including black football players, as intellectually inferior to whites and as undisciplined buffoons. So for decades, black quarterbacks who were stars in college were switched to wide receivers and other positions when they got to the NFL.
The quarterback is supposed to be the smart guy. And Negroes infer the owners don't think any of them are smart enough. Understandably, this angers them. If you are white, you overlook the issues and enjoy the game. On the other hand, if you are black, must sometimes chew at your insides.
I even had a problem, just being able to play quarterback at my high school as an African American, because they didn't want to see an African American guy in those type of leadership roles.
Doug Williams. He is a man about to step solidly into the pages of social history.
These conceptions weren't shattered until Doug Williams took Washington, of all teams, to the 1988 Super Bowl, and as the first black quarterback to ever start the big game, broke every passing record that the league had ever seen.
I hope he puts to bed once and for all about the black athlete in professional football.
But while there's no question that players like Doug Williams and Warren Moon opened the door for black quarterbacks in the NFL today, black QBs continue to be stereotyped as more athletic than intelligent. And the percentage of black quarterbacks is still strikingly low for a league that is roughly 2/3 black.
For everything that the pioneers, the guys that we were talking about, for everything they accomplished and endured, still dealing with racism.
The interesting thing to me is that we see a lot of stars that are black quarterbacks, right? We don't see many average black quarterbacks, right? You're not seeing many black backup quarterbacks. There's a few, but it's not many.
The cold truth is that this is a sport that revels in the violence of the black body for the consumption of white fans, as well as the profit of white owners. And it has a major issue with any kind of black autonomy and control.
Touchdown 49ers!
Not only is he a quarterback, he's a black quarterback. And he decided to use his position as quarterback, the most high-profile position in the NFL, the most public position in sports, to defy the NFL power structure, and on top of that, use the national anthem as his staging ground to do it.
Colin Kaepernick, what he did and what he said crosses sports boundaries.
49ers quarterback refusing to stand for the national anthems for 4 games.
In protest over racial injustice and police brutality.
That summer, 2 murders committed by police had been caught on tape, one of a man named Philando Castile and the other of Alton Sterling. These police shootings were taking place in poor black communities where a lot of these players were from. So they felt this issue very intimately.
Even though we're playing in this league and we're able to do these things on Sunday, we still are people and we still are connected to the things and the issues that are happening around us.
Alton Sterling was killed by police last week.
And they had people on social media saying, who's going to stand up? Are you going to stand up and try to do something about this? This is what Kaepernick was responding to.
A lot of my teammates come from areas where this might be a situation. Their families might be put in this situation. There's people being murdered unjustly. Cops are getting paid leave for killing people. That's not right. That's not right by anyone's standards.
And the reaction was absolute rage.
7 NFL executives, they were anonymous, but the consensus, he says, is that the front offices hate Kaepernick for hate is the word. Hate him. They called him a traitor.
NFL executives immediately made it clear that black athletes using their platform to try to peacefully raise awareness about racism were somehow un-American and an embarrassment to the league.
I've seen far more press conferences of GMs and owners and coaches sticking by their guys amid some pretty murky and disgusting circumstances. But that's all good. But here's somebody who's trying to stand for justice and for equality, and you consider that to be somehow embarrassing your NFL.
When the dust settled, Kaepernick paid for raising these issues with his job, colluded against and shut out of the league by NFL owners.
This morning, the quarterback who led the San Francisco 49ers to a Super Bowl 4 years ago can't find an NFL team.
But NFL owners and executives didn't stop at going after Kaepernick themselves. They also stood by and said and did nothing, while Donald Trump and a rising chorus of overwhelmingly white reactionary voices revived every racist trope in the book to bully and vilify Kaepernick and other black players who took a knee.
They're ungrateful millennial millionaires who won't stand for their own anthem.
I think it's a little bit ludicrous that people are raising their fists when they're really filled with cash.
I am a girl who doesn't know a lot about football, but I do know an ungrateful jerk when I see one.
During the time he was taking a knee, Kaepernick had given away more than $1 million to the kinds of grassroots community organizations that have trouble keeping the lights on. But that wasn't enough for a lot of people.
Why don't they get off their knees and do something? Spend some money, get off your knees and walk the walk.
The league also remained silent and demonstrated zero leadership when a chorus of commentators and sports figures revived the long history of white people of questionable intelligence demeaning black minds.
This is a silly story. It's getting sillier to me, Tucker. I mean, this guy's a child with a head injury. He's a moron. He doesn't know what he's doing.
These players are so uninformed or stupid, I'm not sure which. They don't understand what the national anthem and the American flag stand for.
Then the league held its fire and cowered on the sidelines when Donald Trump told millions of Fox News viewers that Kaepernick and other black players should maybe find another country to live in.
Maybe you shouldn't be in the country. You have to stand proudly for the national anthem.
A classic race-baiting message with its go back to Africa overtones that clearly resonated with Trump's white nationalist, nativist base.
I got a better idea. Why don't you go back to Africa and form your little football teams over in Africa?
The player protests had clearly provoked something deep, ugly, and primordial in the American consciousness.
Colin Kaepernick.
Kaepernick's jersey and likeness were burned and hanged. He faced death threats, and a lot of people got off on playing out their fantasies of doing violence to him.
The Navy is investigating a pair of videos showing a demonstration of military dogs attacking a man wearing a Colin Kaepernick jersey.
And the backlash against Kaepernick and the protests wasn't limited to Trump supporters on the right.
What's your reaction to Colin Kaepernick?
I mean, I'd do it differently. I think if you really thought about issues and about this country, you'd do it differently. And when I heard him explain his rationale, it didn't really make that much sense to me.
And there was no missing how much these perspectives were shaped by race. From the very start, polls showed that huge majorities of black Americans supported Kaepernick and the protests, had no trouble understanding what Kaepernick was saying, and saw the protest as an act of courage.
When Colin initiated what he did, it brought a sense of immediacy that wasn't there before. It brought it to a national level. And I think having the bravery to be able to do that is something that we should all stand for.
But in almost equally large numbers, white Americans opposed Kaepernick and the protests.
Colin, how dare you sit there and blame white people for the problems of minority communities? When will those in black communities take a step back and take some responsibility for the problems of black communities? Because it seems to me blaming white people for all of your problems might make you the racist.
All of this presented the NFL with a very clear choice.
We're proud of our country. We respect our flag.
They could stay on the right side of Trump, the polls, and majority white sentiment, or they could be on the right side of history and help steer the conversation back to police brutality and racial injustice.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired.
Tough words set off demonstrations across the league.
After Donald Trump called for firing black players who protested, the league did its best to signal that it was finally ready to stand up for its players in what seemed to be a miraculous conversion to the cause of racial justice.
Rapper Jay-Z has agreed to partner with the National Football League to promote social justice initiatives and expand entertainment options.
We listen to our players. We have the greatest platform in the world, and we're using it in a very positive way.
But even as Roger Goodell and team owners were singing their own praises for giving black players a voice, they were still doing everything in their power to silence protests altogether.
The NFL is out tonight with a new policy on the national anthem.
insisting that
League owners not only moved to ban protests in 2018.
If anyone is on the field and is disrespectful to the anthem or the flag, there would be a fine from the league.
They also continued working behind the scenes to make sure Colin Kaepernick never stepped foot on the field again.
I think the key takeaway here is that the owners were not interested in acting on any of the players' concerns. The owners were only interested in trying to get good PR.
In its mission and values statement, the NFL proudly and boldly declares that it embraces its unique leadership role in society, assumes the responsibility that comes with that role, and does the right thing, even if it's unpopular. But at every step of the way, NFL executives and team owners responded the way you'd expect the heads of any multi-billion-dollar entertainment corporation to respond. By bending to popular opinion to protect market share, profits, and especially their own power and control.
Hi, Jerry. It's Kristen here. I'm wondering if, in your mind, athletes should just be quiet, play their sport, or should they use their platform to talk about issues that matter to them?
But one thing about the NFL, politics are not good for us in any way. We've got to stay away from politics.
The result has been a case study in the blatant double standards that apply in the NFL. Even as the league has glorified American militarism and weaponry and helped sell disastrous wars from Vietnam to Iraq and beyond, that's been seen as focusing on football and football alone, and hasn't been criticized as a political distraction or intrusion at all.
We're not looking to get into politics. What we're looking to do is continue to get people focused on football.
And so it has gone. Even as the league has spent more money than any other big-time pro sport lobbying Washington politicians, donated disproportionately to an increasingly right-wing Republican Party, and struck one deal after another with government officials to build gleaming billion-dollar stadiums at taxpayer expense while the cities and schools around these stadiums crumble. There's been little to no outcry about the political interests of owners or the exercise of political power mixing inappropriately with sport. But black athletes peacefully protesting injustice, defying the NFL power structure, and potentially alienating the league's majority white fan base? For NFL owners and guardians of the dominant political order in media, that's the kind of political activity that has no place in sport and must be stamped out at all costs.
These hyper left-wing values that Kaepernick and these other guys are bringing to, it's disruptive to the culture of football.
The bottom line is that Kaepernick represented a direct threat to the NFL's brand, to its financial interests, to its ability to control the men who put their bodies on the line and are treated as expendable commodities. And so NFL owners wanted him to be a ghost story, a memory to frighten future players from speaking out.
They're looking at him, he was the face of it, and we're gonna punish you. All the other guys in the league, you better not step out of line. The next time you do that, we'll do the same thing to you.
I think a lot of guys saw how this very powerful institution eliminated somebody's career. You know, they said, we will take you out. That's why martyrs are very far and few between.
But what NFL owners didn't realize at the time, of course, was just how much their effort to turn Kaepernick into a ghost story would come back to haunt them.
The country faces a moment of reckoning. One of the biggest nationwide days of protest since the killing of George Floyd in police custody.
It has been 4 years since Colin Kaepernick first took a knee, but the reason we're talking about it now is entirely different.
For a lot of Americans, black and white, the sight of Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin kneeling on the neck of George Floyd was like a horrific inversion of Colin Kaepernick's peaceful protest against police violence, trying to start a conversation that clearly hadn't been heard.
Tens of thousands of people packing streets and thousands taking to the streets calling for an end.
And so, 4 years after Kaepernick's knee first hit the ground, as the largest demonstrations in American history rose up against police violence and racial injustice, The peaceful gesture that NFL executives and owners had done so much to help vilify and tried so hard to erase from the public memory became a dominant symbol of a reawakened civil rights movement.
Thousands across the country kneel in the middle of American streets. That iconic image, a lone player protesting.
56% of Americans say it is appropriate for athletes to kneel. The George Floyd has changed everything.
It was only then, when polls finally made it safe to do so, that the NFL finally decided to reverse its messaging on the player protests.
We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter. We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest.
Lift every voice and sing.
The league is taking a large and visual stand against racism.
The phrases, "it takes all of us" and "end racism" would appear in NFL end zones this
The league emblazoned its stadiums with words of social uplift. It featured the Black national anthem before games.
Washington's NFL team buckling under pressure.
Even Washington team owner Dan Snyder finally agreed to dump his racist team name under intense pressure from corporate sponsors who suddenly realized that racism might not sell as well as it once did.
Pepsi now says, "We believe it's time for a change."
But from the start, the NFL's carefully crafted words and images raised as many questions as they answered.
Don't apologize, give Colin Kaepernick a job back. Don't come with some empty apology. Take a man's livelihood, strip a man down of his talents, and 4 years later when the whole world is marching, all of a sudden you go and do a FaceTime talking about you sorry?
You cannot have this, all of this commentary. You can't say Black Lives Matter if you're not going to recognize the Black life that you ruined. I'm looking at all of these different organizations out there putting these statements out about equality and about togetherness and about having people's backs. And now I want to see, what you're about. I want to see what you're going to actually do. Is it a reckoning or is it just another dance?
Ultimately, big picture, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything because Roger Goodell, he works for the owners. He is not the NFL owner. You haven't heard much from them, have you? What also matters is the systemic racism inside the NFL. 3 Black head coaches. They've never had a Black majority owner. Ultimately, until you have 32 NFL owners who actually are on board with changing that, what really are they fixing? Nothing.
Los barrios de Estados Unidos, jóvenes de sangre latina.
And these questions haven't gone away. No matter how hard the league has tried to signal how sincere they are about fighting for marginalized communities with marketing and branding campaigns designed to deodorize the stench of its own politics, it hasn't been able to cover up the systemic rot that still courses through the league.
Tonight, the NFL is reeling from a scandal involving one of its top coaches. John Gruden resigned from the Las Vegas Raiders over emails he sent that were anti-Black, anti-gay, and anti-woman. Make no mistake, this story is about a whole lot more than one bigoted NFL coach.
The John Gruden Washington football team scandal that broke in 2021 revealed the glaring disconnect between the league's attempts to brand itself as a positive social force that represents the best of America and a corporate culture that continues to be steeped in hypermasculine posturing, sexism, misogyny, racism, homophobia, bullying, and flag-waving jingoism.
Last week, it was learned Gruden used a racist trope to describe NFL Union Chief DeMaurice Smith. Then, even more troubling emails calling the league's first openly gay player, Michael Sam, a queer, disparaging players who protested during the national anthem, panning the hiring of female referees, and mocking league efforts to reduce concussions. According to the Times, Gruden also exchanged emailed photos with other men showing women wearing only bikini bottoms, including NFL cheerleaders.
It's not just John Gruden. Why did he feel so comfortable?
I fell in love with the game of football Sam was 6 years old. And I get emotional talking about it because of situations like this. We talk about leadership. We give guys these big contracts, and for us to be moving back and not forward in 21st century, like I said, man, National Football League, this hurts me. The clock is ticking, man. I'm sorry.
But as difficult and dark as the politics lurking behind the shield can seem, this is a sport that also provides a measure of political hope. Because so much of how we understand patriotism, race, and masculinity comes from the NFL, maybe, just maybe, players who challenge these tropes can be a part of the solution and turn them on their heads.
America is now forced to deal with the fact that it is in the midst of a power shift.
We've seen this on the field of play itself, where the long legacy of bias against black minds and black leadership is being shattered like never before. Today, we have a whole new generation of young black quarterbacks who are not only defying this racist legacy with absolutely brilliant performances, but also revolutionizing the way the NFL football game is played. But that's not the only reason for hope. Look at the players who have used their hyper-exalted, brought to you by Nike platform to say something about the world in recent years. It's not just Colin Kaepernick, it's so many others.
As we said when we started, Colin and I, nothing will change unless you talk about it. So we're going to continue to talk about it. There's always opposition when you speak on topics like I'm speaking on. But I'm a black man in America. I grew up black in America. You can't tell me that what I've experienced and what I've seen is not true.
And it hasn't just been NFL players. Over the past few years, we've seen professional athletes across the sports world stand up against injustice. And we've seen white allies as well.
What are you doing? What is everyone doing to help? Because everyone knows that we have a problem in this country around racial injustice. And it's all this bullshit about the flag.
Hundreds of white nationalists, some wearing what appear to be...
We saw this immediately following the deadly spectacle of white supremacist rage that exploded in Charlottesville, Virginia, a year after Kaepernick first took a knee, when Philadelphia Eagles linebacker Chris Long, who actually grew up in Charlottesville, became the first white player to show public solidarity with black players who were trying to keep the protests alive.
If anybody really has an issue with somebody being an ally of somebody fighting for equality in a week like this against white supremacy, that's sad. I'm here to show support as a white athlete.
And we saw this same courageous refusal to bend to unjust power when thousands of young people from all across America, long before it was popular, took a knee or raised their fists to show solidarity with Kaepernick and the fight against racial injustice, often at great personal risk.
This has given us another platform to show how we feel.
Right now, there might not be a bunch of people that agree with everything we're saying, you know what I mean? Because the flag means a lot to a lot of people.
My dad was a veteran. He served to protect us, not the flag. The flag is cloth, you know what I mean? It's what the flag represented, and it's what us as a group, as America represents.
For this generation, having each other's backs isn't just an empty slogan in a slick ad campaign designed to burnish the brand. It's actually something they believe in enough to act on and to sacrifice for. And all along there were others from beyond the sports world who refused to follow the NFL's lead in trying to vilify and silence Kaepernick and the player protests.
Veterans for Kaepernick, that was the hashtag, and as you see there...
We saw it in the statements of combat veterans and active service men and women in America's armed forces, who argued from the start that Kaepernick's stance was entirely consistent with what the military is supposed to be fighting for.
A group of veterans is now getting behind Kaepernick.
I saw a lot of folks claiming that Colin Kaepernick was disrespecting troops or somehow disrespecting veterans with the protests that he's making. A lot of those people not having served themselves. And I think me and my colleagues who signed this letter really wanted to make sure that there was a voice out there saying those people don't speak for us.
Over the next decade, I expect the NFL to continue to be a contested space where these ideas pumped in straight from the owner's box, like hypermasculinity, militarism, and racism, are challenged.
You know, the owners are still very much part of this kind of good old boys club, and that does trickle down. That being said, that is changing. I mean, we have seen players become more accepting and become more progressive.
It is a groundbreaking moment in the National Football League. For the first time, an active player has come out as gay.
What's up, people? I'm Carl Nassib. Just want to take a quick moment to say that I'm gay.
I'm a pretty private person, so I hope you guys know that I'm really not doing this for attention. I just think that representation and visibility are so important.
The bravery and just awesomeness that Carl displayed last night for sticking out on his own, I commend that, I support that, and I back that. It's stuff like that that needs to keep, happening in the NFL because we represent the rest of the U.S. and the rest of the world.
Is your generation of football player different than the generation or two that came before when it comes to human rights?
Oh, absolutely. The young guys now coming into the NFL are a lot more open-minded, a lot more progressive. It's an idea of where we're going as a nation.
Between the 1990s and the 2000s, there weren't really many athletes who were speaking on social issues. I was a generation who didn't get to see Muhammad Ali, who didn't get to see John Carlos. I didn't get to see those magnificent things when people stood up for what they believe in. Now we have young kids being aware of their situation, and it really started from the empathy and compassion of the players in the NFL.
I think now what we are seeing is a new strident set of young athletes who are saying, you know what, it's not enough to be neutral. At some point, as a person of great power and influence, as an athlete, you either stand for equality or you don't.
This is why the NFL, beneath their posturing, reacts fearfully in the face of player autonomy. Expect more of it in the years to come. Expect players who challenge our conventional notions of masculinity. Expect black NFL players who refuse to be fearful in the face of job insecurity. Expect players to speak out against our forever wars in the face of the NFL's salute to service. In other words, expect the NFL, a multi-billion-dollar profit machine that inherited the wind, to reap the whirlwind.